Hey guys, so I just want to do a quick clip on the setup of the iDatalink Maestro on an Avic 8200, probably be similar on most of the Avics, and I put this in a Chevy Express van, again, probably mostly the same on a lot of the newer Chevys. This one's a 2013, but I found the harness to be a little confusing, so I just wanted to do a quick video on that. When you set up your Avic Maestro, it will give you an instruction manual, and there's some decent instructions in there. It gives you the wiring diagrams and stuff like that, but there's not a lot of close-up views and stuff. Now, I had the Avic working, and I actually had the Axxess harness, which is a bit more inexpensive. It does retain the OnStar. I don't care about the OnStar. I'll probably disconnect the OnStar because I don't want OnStar, but I don't want to have it permanently disabled behind the dash, so I want it working back there. So I had this harness, and overall it's pretty good. It worked fine. Some of the things are manual, like the OnStar volume is kind of this kludgy thing that you got to ground out. The chime volume is cool, but it's in here, so you got to kind of set it once and leave it once you put it in the dash. The hookup in terms of the wires and stuff was about the same on the Axxess. This is an Axxess GMLAN 01, I believe, is this one here. So I pulled this. I didn't realize that the iDatalink Maestro could give me more features, and so when I realized that, I kind of called Crutchfield, I talked to them, and we chatted about it, and I ended up ordering the iDatalink 01, which was a huge pain because I had to do this all over again. I had to tear all the dash apart, pull the Axxess out, which is now kind of a loss. I mean, it still works, but don't need it. But I thought I'd show you, here is the iDatalink and the Maestro. And so this is the main control box, and then I had to get the wiring harness for this vehicle. Let me just show you a couple things that you might run into. So these are the main harnesses coming out of the rig, the stock ones, and they hook into whatever harness you're using. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. It was the same on the GMOS. One of the things that was different about the Maestro is just a ton of cords coming out of the Maestro running to different things, right? So the harness, all these harness plugs, because there's a ton of stuff going on with the Maestro, all the way from the OBD wire that runs down to the OBD port to all these different modules. Now, most of them are pretty color-coded, so it's fairly straightforward. I was a little confused at first because in all of the equipment, I ended up with just a wiring harness like this that was all loose wiring, and it fit in this slot. But that wasn't the slot I needed. This must have just been the generic one that came with the wiring harness kit, because it's two separate boxes. You had the harness and then you had the Maestro. In reality, what plugs into that port is the similar looking port that comes on the wiring harness by default. So maybe this other one came with the Maestro kit, I forget. Bottom line is, the one that I plugged into that hookup was here, okay? And that was a little confusing in the documentation what I was supposed to do, because it talked about a data link cable going to the radio. So I kept thinking, oh, I need to run from this to the radio harness and wire into that, but it wasn't making sense. That's not what I needed to do. All these components plug in, right? Including the main connection, the speaker for the chimes, all of the wires coming from the main harness, and they're pretty much designed to only fit where they go. The blue one seems to be empty. The data patch cable goes over and it plugs in the back of the Avic, so you get all your data stuff. And so once you realize kind of that this one is part of the harness, not the separate one that you may get with it, goes into this little square block next to the orange. The rest of it is pretty straightforward, but it does get a little confusing because in this kit you get all these different pieces that I'm guessing for different vehicles and setups you need. But it took me a few minutes to realize, and playing around, to realize that, okay, these pieces that have to do with the speaker wiring, on this one there was not an integrated amp in my Express, so I just kind of had to work all that out. And ultimately what had to happen is the harness, let me show you the back of the radio, it's a mess. So down here, of course, is our main harness going into the radio. This is the one that came with the Pioneer. All those wires come out, and that part wasn't automated. I was thinking that it would all be quick connects, and that was not the case with the Maestro. I still had to color code wire all of the main wires from the Pioneer harness into the appropriate wires on the Avic, and ended up with just a couple that were not used. And I just taped those off so they didn't contact anything. Okay, so everything coming off, the blue wire here is going out. It's an amp power button. In this case, I've tapped it off. I've wired it into the harness as suggested, but I also have it tapping off and going to my little powered subwoofer here that's in the rig. One thing that was a little confusing too is the Maestro has an audio output. Okay, so the audio output's coming out of the Maestro. I think it's this one, and it has just a standard audio jack at the end, and it's talking about it going into the Maestro audio accessory jack. Well, apparently on the 8200 there's only one audio input. So effectively this thing is using, from the Maestro, it uses up the aux input jack. Now the way I have this set up, I have an aux input jack wired in to my panel, right? So I have an aux input from the dash, and I bought some aftermarket, the little round ones, you know, that go into the dash on the front, and I can plug stuff into USB ports. I did all the USB ports out of the back of the Avic that way, and audio jacks, all that kind of stuff. So what I did, long story short, is I took just a two-way splitter for the aux input so that I could have an aux input from the Maestro, which I believe this just carries the OnStar, because when I unplug it, there's no sound from the OnStar. And then the other one coming in from my dash aux input if I do want to do aux music or something like that, which I don't do very often with the Bluetooth and the CarPlay. But now it's there if I want it, and this is just a standard stereo splitter, and everything seems to be working fine with that, okay? So I'm not going to give a crazy tour of the back of the radio because it's kind of hard to see, but I will show you kind of a couple things on the Avic here, and yours may look a little different, but I have my antenna, my GPS. These are not used. I don't have those in place because the speaker wires are going amped straight out of here at this point and going out in the main harness, which is down here. Aux, a little hard to see, aux input jack. One of the things that was a little confusing is I thought maybe that aux input for the Maestro went into the WR port, which is a wired remote, but it's an audio jack style. So I thought, well, maybe that's the wired remote, but that didn't seem to be working. So put it in the aux, and I just use a splitter. On the Maestro, the mute connector, in this particular case at least, doesn't seem to have a connection, and it may be because I don't have steering wheel controls on this guy here. Here's the data cable coming from the Maestro, going to the back of the Avic. And then, of course, over here we just have our regular, we have HDMI, I have outputs for the sub, and then I've used all those ports, the USB ports. In fact, I got to plug a couple of those in because they came out undone when I put them out, but you can see that there's one USB port for Android and one for iOS there, so I'll plug into those. The yellow one doesn't seem to be used. It must be some proprietary thing for Pioneer's internal use. Rear audio out, I'm not using at the moment. And other than that, everything pretty much just wired in and hooked up, and we seem to be working. So I pretty much just followed the basic instructions for what's on the back of the Pioneer, and then the instructions I downloaded for the Maestro. And aside from the things I described, everything was pretty straightforward. The color coding of all the wires, it seemed to be correct, and everything does seem to be working. And long story short, the reason, let me switch it over here and kind of, it's not back in the dash, so it's a mess. The reason that I did it all, ultimately, and it does work, if I go to the AV, I can go down to my car features, and you can see that I can have my gauges right here on the head unit now, which is really cool. I can get my OBD stuff coming over from there. I can customize my gauges. So this is one less device I have to have on my dash, because when I'm towing and traveling, doing a lot of road tripping in the super van, I want all this information. And there's just a lot of cool stuff. It has an instant mile per gallon. I haven't driven it yet. We'll see if it works, because by default that's not displayed on the dash of this. Just the average miles per gallon is displayed. But you can customize all these gauges, intake temperatures, and you can go through, and there's quite a few settings. There are a few things grayed out, probably because they're not options, like the temperature controls. This doesn't have like a climate control system that has specific temperature controls, and it doesn't have sensors and things on it, so those aren't showing up. But the Maestro is working. These features were not available at all on the other one. okay, on the GMOS, the Axxess, which, by the way, if you don't need any of this stuff, the Axxess was quite a bit cheaper, and it worked fine. It wasn't a problem. Everything wired up basically the same. If anything, the Maestro was more confusing just because there's so many little wires coming off, and I was looking then at all these other wires that came in the bag thinking, well, where does this go? Where does that go? You know, am I missing something? And just spending the time to go through it all. But overall, yeah, everything worked fine. I'm gonna double check. We have the blue and the orange still open, but near as I can tell, there's nothing in this particular setup that needs to go in those ports. I am probably gonna plug a USB cable into this, which you use to program it, but I'll probably leave one running out and just have it hanging down here under the dash for easy access, just like I did with camera inputs, backup camera inputs and things like that, because video extension, backup camera, etc. Because I may want to add those things at a later date, and so I want them to be easy access so I don't have to tear this whole dash apart, because it's kind of a pain. You know, I've done it like 3 times now and I'm getting used to it, but it's a pain. So, all right, I'm gonna stuff all this. I'm gonna stuff all this back in the dash. I think I covered it. I'm no professional or installer or anything on this stuff. I just wanted to share this because I didn't see a video on this topic, and so every now and then I do this. I'm guessing it will be similar on most of the GM vehicles from this year, but by all means, I mean, refer to the manuals from your head unit and from the Maestro. These are just some things that I ran across that were a little confusing, and I worked them out, and everything seems to be working great. The sound is coming through nicely. The gauges are working. So the new features that I added the Maestro for, I think will really be worth it. I do a lot of road tripping. We tow the trailer, so I want to be able to do things like monitor the transmission temp. And now I don't have to get a separate unit on the dash. I can have all of that right within my head unit, which is going to be really elegant and keep things really tidy. Pretty excited about that. So that's where we are. I'm going to put all this back in and make it all pretty and hook up all my wires and connectors, and it all fits in there, and it'll be nice. All right, you guys, take care.